Lila adjusted the strap of her janitor's bag over her shoulder, wiping her hands on her worn-out jeans. It had been a long day scrubbing floors at the high school, and the last thing she expected when she opened her mailbox was a letter stamped with the official seal of a law office. The words inside left her frozen on her front porch. To Miss Lila Jennings, it is my duty to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of your grandfather's estate. Her grandfather, Henry Jennings, had passed away 2 weeks earlier. Alone in the small town he refused to leave. Lila hadn't been close to him in years. She had barely made it to the funeral, more out of obligation than grief. And now here he was, reaching out from beyond the grave. The inheritance included a remote cabin in the woods, a property Lila didn't even know existed. Her family had always described her grandfather as a simple man with little to his name, so this revelation left her puzzled. Why leave it to her, the granddaughter who'd failed to follow the family tradition of ambition? 2 days later, Lila found herself driving up a winding dirt road, the address from the letter guiding her deep into the woods. The GPS cut out miles ago, leaving her to navigate the dense forest with nothing but her instincts and the occasional weathered signpost. The cabin came into view at the top of a hill, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was modest but sturdy, with a slanted roof and a wraparound porch. Despite its isolation, it looked surprisingly well kept, as if someone had been maintaining it regularly. Stepping out of her car, Lila hesitated, gripping her keys tightly. The air was colder here, sharp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She stood there for a moment, the enormity of her grandfather's gift pressing down on her. It felt wrong somehow, like stepping into a life she wasn't meant to have. Taking a deep breath, she climbed the porch steps. The wood creaked beneath her boots, and a chill ran down her spine. The key fit easily into the lock, and with a twist, the door swung open. Inside, the cabin was more than she expected. It wasn't just a cabin, it was a home. The living room was furnished with worn leather chairs, a stone fireplace, and bookshelves filled with old, faded spines. The kitchen, visible through an open archway, was stocked with dishes and even fresh-looking produce on the counter. She froze in the doorway. Someone had been here recently. Her mind raced as she stepped cautiously inside. The floorboards groaned softly underfoot, each sound amplified in the eerie silence. On the mantel above the fireplace, she noticed a collection of framed photographs. Most were of her grandfather in his younger years, but a few featured a woman Lila didn't recognize, a striking brunette with piercing eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered, lifting one of the frames. The photo showed the woman and her grandfather sitting on the porch of this very cabin, laughing together as if they shared some private joke. The date scribbled on the back read 1989. Lila set the frame down, her hands trembling. Questions swirled in her mind. Why had her grandfather kept this place a secret? And who was the woman who seemed so intimately tied to him? Her exploration led her to a small desk in the corner of the living room. The drawers were locked, but a single envelope lay on top, addressed to her in her grandfather's familiar handwriting. For Lila, it read. Heart pounding, she opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. My dearest Lila, if you're reading this, it means I've passed on and the cabin is now yours. There are things in this house you may not understand. Things I kept hidden for reasons you'll come to see. This place was my sanctuary, but it also holds memories that are difficult to explain. Take your time here. You'll find the answers you need. With love, Grandpa. The letter left her with more questions than answers. Her grandfather had always been a man of few words, but this felt deliberate, as if he were leaving behind a puzzle for her to solve. Lila set the letter down and looked around the cabin again, her gaze lingering on the bookshelf, the photographs, the little details that suddenly felt loaded with meaning. She had come here expecting to find an old, forgotten shack. Instead, she had stepped into a life she didn't recognize, a life her grandfather had kept hidden from everyone. Night fell quickly, and the shadows in the cabin deepened. Lila lit a few oil lamps she found in the kitchen, their warm glow casting flickering patterns on the walls. She made herself a cup of tea with supplies from the pantry, her mind restless with thoughts of the woman in the photos. Whoever she was, Lila was certain of one thing. This cabin had been more than a retreat for her grandfather. It had been the heart of a secret, one that now rested squarely on her shoulders. She stood at the window, staring out into the dark forest, the tea growing cold in her hands. The weight of the inheritance felt heavier now, no longer just about property but about uncovering truths her grandfather had taken to his grave. And yet, despite the unease, Lila felt a flicker of determination. She didn't know what she would find here, but she was ready to confront it, no matter how unsettling the answers might be. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start digging through the cabin in earnest. If her grandfather had left her clues, she would find them. For now, though, she would rest. She turned back to the living room, shutting the curtains against the encroaching night. The cabin felt different now, no longer just a relic of her grandfather's past but a place where her own story might begin. As she climbed into the old creaky bed in the back room, a single thought lingered in her mind. What was he hiding? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the cabin holding its secrets close. Morning light seeped through the cabin's thin curtains, bathing the wooden walls in pale gold. Lila woke with a stiff neck and a nagging unease. She had hoped sleep would bring clarity, but instead it brought dreams. Fragments of her grandfather's weathered face, the mysterious woman in the photo, and the cryptic note he'd left behind. She rolled out of bed, pulled on her jacket, and made a cup of coffee. The cabin was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire she'd stoked in the hearth. There was comfort in the routine of brewing coffee, but her mind kept circling back to the unanswered questions. Why had her grandfather hidden this place from their family? Who was the woman in the photograph? And what had he meant by things you may not understand? The desk in the corner beckoned her. She approached it, running her fingers along its worn edges. The locked drawers resisted her initial attempts to open them, but a search of the cabin yielded a small brass key tucked in the back of a kitchen drawer. The key fit perfectly. Inside the desk, she found an assortment of items. Old receipts, neatly folded maps, and a stack of letters tied together with twine. The letters were addressed to Margaret, the name scrawled in her grandfather's careful handwriting. Lila hesitated before untying the bundle. She wasn't sure she wanted to uncover the secrets they held, but the weight of her grandfather's note pushed her forward. The first letter was dated June 3, 1988. Dearest Margaret, this cabin feels alive when you're here. It's as if the woods themselves hold their breath when you laugh, and the air thickens with something I can only describe as joy. I know what we're doing is wrong, but you make me feel like the man I always wanted to be. I don't deserve you, but I can't let you go. Lila's hands trembled as she read. Her grandfather, the man she had always seen as stoic and unflinchingly moral, had been in love with someone who wasn't her grandmother. The letters continued, each one painting a picture of a passionate yet forbidden affair. Margaret wasn't just a passing fling. She was someone her grandfather deeply loved. The letters spoke of stolen weekends at the cabin, quiet evenings by the fire, and promises that could never be fulfilled. Lila sank into the leather chair by the desk, the weight of the revelations pressing down on her. Her grandmother had passed away years ago, but the memory of her stern yet loving demeanor was still fresh. Had she known? Had she suspected that her husband's frequent trips to fish alone were anything but? The next letter provided another layer to the story. Margaret, I saw him today, your husband. He asked me how the business was going, and I had to shake his hand and pretend as if I wasn't the man who held you in his arms just days ago. I hate myself for the lies, but I hate the thought of losing you more. Sometimes I wonder if he knows. If he sees the way I look at you. Lila closed the letter, nausea twisting her stomach. Her grandfather's betrayal wasn't just of her grandmother. It extended to another family entirely. Margaret was married, and the affair had been an intricate web of lies and deception. Suddenly, Lila's phone buzzed on the table, startling her. She grabbed it and saw Ethan's name on the screen. "Hey," she answered, her voice shaky. "Lila, where are you? You said you'd call yesterday." Ethan's tone was warm but edged with concern. "I'm at the cabin," she said, unsure how much to tell him. "It's a lot to process. My grandfather wasn't who I thought he was. Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan offered, but Lila hesitated. She and Ethan had been together for 2 years, but moments like this reminded her of the walls she still kept up. He was steady, reliable, and kind, yet she often found herself pulling back when things got too heavy. "Not yet," she said finally. "I need to figure it out first." Ethan didn't push, but before hanging up, he said something that lingered with her. "You don't have to carry it alone, Lila." After the call, she returned to the desk, her resolve hardened. She had to know the full truth, no matter how painful. Among the letters, she found a photograph tucked into an envelope. The image showed Margaret standing beside a man. Her husband, Lila assumed. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at his face. He looked familiar. Too familiar. Digging through her memory, it clicked. The man in the photograph was Ethan's grandfather. The realization hit her like a freight train. The tangled web of her grandfather's affair extended into her own life. Ethan's family was connected to this story, to this betrayal. What were the chances? It felt almost too cruel to be coincidence. Lila paced the room, her thoughts racing. Should she tell Ethan? Would he even believe her? And if he did, what would it mean for their relationship? Her gaze fell on the envelope she'd found the photo in. Written on the front in her grandfather's handwriting were the words, "For the truth." Inside, she found another letter, this one addressed directly to her. "Lila, if you've come this far, then you've uncovered the life I hid from everyone. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll understand that love is rarely simple. I made choices I'm not proud of, but they were mine to make. There's more to this story than you'll find here, but I leave it to you to decide what to do with it. The truth isn't always kind, but it's necessary. Grandpa." The letter was both an apology and a challenge, a plea for her to confront the past and decide how much of it deserved to see the light. Lila folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Her grandfather's words left her conflicted, but one thing was clear. The secrets of the cabin weren't just his, they were hers now too. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lila stared out the window, her reflection blurred against the darkening woods. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on her chest, but it also sparked something new, determination. Tomorrow she would call Ethan. It was time to find out how deeply their families' lives were intertwined. The following morning, Lila paced the cabin's living room, clutching her phone in one hand and her grandfather's final letter in the other. Ethan's number was already dialed, but her finger hovered over the call button. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest. What could she even say? Her relationship with Ethan had always been her refuge, a place where she felt safe from the turbulence of her life. But now, the discovery of their family's intertwined past felt like a crack in that foundation. How could she confront him without risking everything they'd built? Finally, she tapped the screen and pressed the phone to her ear. It rang twice before Ethan answered. "Hey, Lila," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "Everything okay?" "No," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. It's about our families." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Our families? What's going on?" "It's hard to explain over the phone," she said. "Can you come out to the cabin? Please?" He agreed without hesitation, and an hour later, Lila heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. She opened the door to see him stepping out of his car, concern etched into his face. Ethan didn't even wait for her to speak. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Lila gestured for him to come inside, leading him to the desk where the letters were spread out. She handed him the photograph of Margaret and her husband, her throat tight. "Do you recognize him?" she asked. Ethan stared at the picture, confusion flickering across his face before recognition dawned. "That's my grandfather," he said slowly. "Where did you get this?" Lila took a deep breath. "I found it here in this cabin. Ethan, there's something you need to know. My grandfather had an affair with the woman in that photo, Margaret. She was your grandfather's wife." The words hung heavy in the air. Ethan's face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something darker, hurt. "Wait," he said, shaking his head. "Are you telling me your grandfather and my grandmother?" Lila nodded, her stomach twisting. "It's all in the letters he left behind. They were in love, Ethan. For years." Ethan sank into the leather chair, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. "I mean, I knew my grandparents had a rocky marriage, but I never imagined." "I didn't want to believe it either," Lila said softly. "But it's the truth. And now we're stuck with it." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Ethan finally broke the quiet. "So what now?" he asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't know," Lila admitted. "But I couldn't keep this from you. It felt wrong." Ethan leaned back in the chair, staring at the letters on the desk. "It's like our entire relationship is built on the ashes of their mistakes," he said bitterly. "No," Lila said firmly, her voice surprising even herself. "Our relationship is ours. What they did, it doesn't define us unless we let it." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "You really believe that?" "I have to," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "Otherwise, what's the point? They kept secrets, Ethan. They hurt people because they were too scared to face the truth. But we're not them. We can choose to be better." Ethan nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "You're right," he said. "We don't have to repeat their mistakes." The resolve in his voice brought a sense of relief to Lila, but there was still one more decision to make. She turned back to the desk and picked up the letter her grandfather had addressed for the truth. "There's one last thing," she said, handing it to Ethan. "This letter was meant for Margaret's family. I think he wanted her descendants to know the truth too." Ethan took the envelope, his expression unreadable. "Do you think I should give it to my parents?" "I don't know," Lila said honestly. "That's not my decision to make. But I think your family deserves to know just like I did. Even if it hurts." Ethan stared at the envelope for a long moment before tucking it into his jacket pocket. "I'll think about it," he said. Lila nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step forward. They spent the rest of the day walking through the woods surrounding the cabin, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in days, Lila felt a sense of lightness, as if sharing the burden had lessened its weight. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the forest in shades of amber and gold, Ethan turned to her. "We're going to be okay, right?" he asked. Lila reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We are," she said, her voice steady. "We just have to keep choosing each other no matter what." That night, as they sat by the fire in the cabin, Lila felt a quiet sense of closure. Her grandfather's secrets had changed her life, but they had also given her clarity. The cabin, once a symbol of betrayal, now felt like a place of healing, a space where she and Ethan could forge their own story, free from the shadows of the past. The fire crackled softly, its warmth wrapping around them like a promise. Lila knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them.